Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's Food Systems in Season. This week we have a very interesting program for you. We have a lot of moving parts. As you can see, we have a lot of different cameras. We're going to show a lot of exactly how to preserve your harvest. So hopefully all of you are working very hard at producing more food at home. You have a big vegetable garden going. Everything works out great. You don't get any bugs or diseases, and you get a huge harvest. And now you're wondering, well, what exactly do I do with everything? How do I save it so I can eat it, in the winter or next year? So we're going to cover all those topics today. So let me go ahead and turn it over to Wendy Lynch and let her kind of give you an idea of where we're going today.
Awesome. So, welcome back to session 4. And we are excited today to have with us, I don't know if it's left or right on camera, but Melanie Thomas here in Flagler County. And then we have Jana Anderson in Orange County and LuAnn Duncan, who is from Sumter but visiting Orange County today. So, I'm going to turn it over to Melanie Thomas and let's get started on home food preservation, talking about different ways that you can preserve your harvest.
Thanks, Wendy. I appreciate that. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. We very much appreciate it. And as Bill, led into that just perfectly, we oftentimes will plant that garden and get that green thumb, and then all of a sudden we have all of this big bounty of stuff and have no idea what to do with it. All of these green beans that come in, you don't realize exactly how many green beans can be harvested in one row. So what is it that you're going to do with it at this point? We're going to talk about the 3 actual different methods of food preservation today. And I say 3 because we're going to talk about drying, canning, and freezing. And people will say, well, what about refrigeration? Well, actually, refrigeration is not a form of food preservation. It is just a way to keep things cool and fresh for a very short period of time. When we talk about food preservation, we're talking at least 4 weeks to 6 weeks out and longer. So that's when we're talking about preserving the harvest. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about freezing today and the different ways to do it. I jokingly say that freezing is probably the safest way to preserve your bounty when it comes to freezing itself. The issues often lie in when it actually starts to be thawed. Oftentimes when you're talking about canning and dehydrating, we are talking about killing microorganisms, making sure that you don't have any kind of foodborne illnesses in there. With freezing, what typically happens is we will actually put all of those organisms to sleep. So you're actually not killing them. You're just putting everything to sleep. It's kind of going into a hibernation mode, so to speak. Once everything gets past that 32, 35 degree mark, 41 is the ideal temperature, but between 40 and 140 degrees is what we consider the danger zone for microorganisms. That's when we can get foodborne illnesses and stuff like that. So when we talk about freezing, there's several different methods, different things that you can actually do when you actually want to properly freeze fruits, vegetables, meats, whatever it is. One of the biggest things with freezing is how long it actually can stay in the freezer. And it really depends on the product. Typically, your softer fruits, such as strawberries, those kinds of things are usually going to stay optimal for about 3 to 5 months. After that, they start to get really mushy. They'll break down. You may start to get some freezer burn in there. Meats typically are anywhere from 8 months to a year is their max life. A lot of times with pork, particularly, the fats inside pork will start to kind of basically break down, and it turns like a rancid flavor. It is not necessarily bad. It's not going to make you sick. It just doesn't taste good. That's actually what freezer burn is the dry air that's in the freezer gets onto the food. So we want to make sure that we're protecting that particular food well against freezer burn, making sure that it can stay in that freezer for as long as possible. So there's different ways to do that. The first way is obviously using any type of there's actually 2 different types of containers that we talk about in freezing. One is going to be your rigid container, and a rigid container is going to be basically just any kind of a freezer safe container. It's usually some type of a plastic with a plastic lid. These you can pick up just about anywhere. Your big box stores, grocery stores will sell them. It's a regular container with a lid. The issue, the good part about these kinds of containers is they're easy to stack, maybe inside of a freezer. You can get them in all different kinds of sizes, making sure that it actually says freezer safe on it. A lot of them are not freezer safe, so it's not things like your freezer bags that specifically say freezer container on them. These are things that you can get in different sizes as well. So you're going to have making sure that you fill it up completely. Every single item when it comes to freezing your fruits, vegetables, meats are going to have a headspace. And Bill, if you want to show the headspace on this, this is a canning jar headspace. But what happens is you can can, and you can freeze in a freezer jar. So as long as it says it's freezer safe, a lot of your Ball, Kerr, Mason jars are freezer safe as well, the ones that are made today. Many of them years ago were not. So making sure that your newer ones are in fact freezer safe. You'll have a headspace on here. You'll see on here it says 1 inch, ½ inch, ¼ inch. Every product is going to have a different headspace. This is good for canning and for freezing. So you can take that picture down. What happens is obviously when you put the product in the freezer, it's going to either specifically with freezing it will expand. So if you fill this container all the way to the top with whatever product it is, put the lid on it, stick it in the freezer, and you go back in there in a week and all of a sudden the lid has popped off. It's because everything has expanded in there and popped that seal. You want to make sure that that doesn't happen. So you need that little bit of headspace. The other way or other product that we like to use are different types of wraps. This here is heavy duty aluminum foil, making sure that you do use heavy duty aluminum foil and not just regular aluminum foil. If you only have your standard aluminum foil, what you can do is just take it and fold it on itself so it's a double layer before you wrap your food. It's not ideal, so to speak, but it will work. So you may not be able, instead of keeping it in the freezer for 3 months, it may only last about 2. As far as making sure the quality wise. Now, when we talk about freezing as far as thawing out, this is where things get sometimes complicated with individuals. Any type of freezing food or food product should be thawed either in the refrigerator, under running water, or in a microwave and defrosted. It should never be left on the counter to thaw on its own. What happens is all of those microorganisms that were put to sleep start to wake up. I like to sometimes think of that as a bear who has gone into winter and been sleeping for a while. And when he wakes up, he's hungry and he's ravenous and he's a little angry. And these microorganisms are the same exact way. They wake up, they start to multiply. That's when danger zone starts to happen. You can cook it, but if you don't cook it to temperature or cook it long enough, it is not going to kill those microorganisms and it could make you sick. So anything when it comes to freezing, make sure it is thawed properly and then cooked immediately. Things should never be frozen, thawed, and then refrozen. That's one of the reasons when it comes to hurricanes, anything like that, when we lose electricity, things in the freezer may have started to thaw. If there are ice crystals still in the product, it is safe to consume. You should not refreeze it, but you can cook it and consume it. If there are no crystals in there, you have no idea how long it's been completely thawed. You should completely dispose of it at that particular moment. So one other thing with the freezer is obviously when these containers, you're stacking them in there, sometimes you don't know exactly what's in there. Everything that's a dark color all starts to blend the same in the freezer. So you want to make sure that you label it, label what it is and the date that you put it in there, so that whenever you're starting to pull things back out, you eat the one that you put in there first, first in, first out, so to speak. The other thing is making sure when you label, this may look like just regular masking tape. This is actual freezer tape. You can pick this up, same places that you pick up all of your freezer containers. The freezer tape will stick to the actual container for a long period of time. A lot of times with masking tape or anything like that, you put it on the container within 2 or 3 minutes. or I'm sorry, within 2 or 3 days, that adhesive starts to unstick, so to speak, and then all of a sudden your sticker has come off. So stick that on your container, label it, then you know exactly what it is. Now chili and vegetable soup, don't get confused because they all run together after a while. So that's kind of your basic scenarios with freezing. If we have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat if you'd like. Otherwise, I'm going to send it over to LuAnn, who is going to talk to you today about dehydrating.
Okay. Hey, everybody. We're here in Orange County Kitchen and glad to have you with us. We are going to talk about dehydrating, and a lot of people don't really think about dehydrating in Florida. At least when I moved to Florida, I wasn't thinking that, and then people started asking questions. It still has a place. It just has to be done right. So Jana's here with me. I don't know. Have you ever dehydrated, Jana?
Well, never dehydrated. You know, I grew up around a farm. My aunt and uncle had a farm, and I was used to freezing and canning,
Right.
not dehydration. So this is all new to me. So I'm your student right now, as well as everybody in the audience. So what do you have here as far?
Okay, well, I've got 2 different dehydrators to start with, and I think you can see this one. And the trays in here, there must be about 12 trays. This is like a Cadillac. This is probably 3 times the old-fashioned Nesco that I have here. And both of these have what is necessary in Florida to dehydrate, though. They have a fan, and they also have a temperature gauge. Now, if you have a convection oven that goes low enough, sometimes they're not going to go down to 130, 140, which is what you're going to want to do for vegetables. But if you have, and what's that new gadget? It just left my mind. The air fryers.
Yes.
The air fryers.
Yes,
They go down low enough, and you can dehydrate with them as well. Now, each of these will come with different kinds of trays in them. This one has something that you could do like a fruit leather, a vegetable leather with, or something that's wet. I use this if I'm doing minced garlic.
Okay.
Because it's going to fall through those little holes. Okay. And these are nice to have, you know, but you may have to line them depending on the size of what you're dehydrating.
So are there differences between the 2?
Well, the differences between the 2 is how many trays you can do. And this one, the air comes from the back forward.
Okay.
So you're not going to get as much mixture of flavors and odors. And this one, it goes from bottom to top. So you're going to get a mixture of that.
Okay, makes sense. Are there any kind of circumstances or situations that people may want to use a dehydrator, especially here living in Florida?
Well, the thing is you have extra and you don't want it to waste.
Right.
Now, if you have extra casserole, you need a freeze dryer. Those are very, very expensive because you don't want extra fat, milks, things that are going to spoil in the product. So we're pretty much just doing the vegetables and the meat jerkies. And so I have with us here today a kind of a popular thing right now, tomatoes, green beans that she just did. If you dehydrate them, then you can make them into powders and mix them in if the family doesn't like them. I don't know how many people out there at some time in their life did not like pieces of onions in their food, fresh or dried. So Jana is going to show us how to make it into a powder. So these were dehydrated. I think, can you see?
Right there.
There, okay.
There you go.
Okay. And they were red because the red ones were on sale. They were already chopped on sale for $1 to get rid of them.
Nice.
But see, once again, that's an opportunity. So this is a coffee grinder. You can do it in a high power mixer on high, but go ahead.
Just dump some in the top.
That, or you've got a scoop here if you want it, whichever works best for you.
Let's do the scoop. I'm not gonna full scoop.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
And you can put as much in as you want. Okay. Up to the top
Of it.
Okay. Metal there. Yeah.
I don't know if you guys can see. I'm just taking that spoon and just pouring it right there in the top.
Okay.
Okay. Good to go.
All right. So I don't want to do it for you, but this is mine, and it can get, of course. Smile, you're on candy camera.
Yeah, I know.
There you go.
I know,
Okay,
I know.
go. Whoop, it's not on tight. So let's see. Okay, this goes where it's unlocked. The
Okay.
little, this
Mhm.
has to line up.
There.
It's unlocked. There we go.
See, it loves mom.
And then it loves mom sometimes. There we go.
Okay, so
All right.
now we're locked. And so I
Okay,
just push the button on the front.
Might be noisy. Hang on.
Here we go. Oh, no.
No, it isn't. It's not, still not happy. There's the arrow.
Okay.
There we go.
Bam, we
Now,
got the click. Ready?
Yep.
Oh,
just as if it was your coffee beans or anything else, you can grind up anything into a powder. But if you have a large amount, obviously you might want to do it in a blender. If it looks
Good
like a powder,
dusting
we
out.
thought, there we go. You want to take it off and
Sure.
show them? It
Sure,
should come
sure.
off easier than it went on. Should
Maybe.
being the operative word.
Maybe. Maybe not. There we
it
go.
goes. And okay, and so it could get a little bit more mixed up, but now you have fresh onion powder.
Nice.
It's going to have a lot more flavor to it, and it's still going to have some of those nutrients unless you've kept it for a really long time.
It smells wonderful.
Yeah.
And I took the cap off.
Okay, so I'm going to move that over to the side a little bit. We're also going to talk to you about jerky.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things is we've done these in some of the classes. Can you see that okay? Yeah, there we go.
There we go.
One of the things about it is that years ago, you know, people just took this raw meat, just like I'm going to just show you here. Okay. Okay, let me just show you. Okay, so basically, once again, I got a roast on sale. If you hunt and you have meat, it helps to freeze those pieces, and so that they're only partially frozen, and then it's easy to get like 1/8 inch slices with a knife. If you want to do it from the butcher, even at your store, a lot of times they will just slice it for you.
Okay.
But it needs to be cooked, and it should be marinated because you want flavor.
Mm-hmm.
Jana kind of
Smells so
liked the
good.
aroma of
It
it
does.
here. I purchased a seasoning packet. I cooked it until it came to a simmer for a while, and then I drained it and put it into the dehydrator. Now it can go into this dehydrator here. If it's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and lift this up.
Mhm.
Let's see if I can pull it over there where you can. Whoop.
Yeah, there you go.
Do you want to do it? Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
You can see it. No, this way.
There you go.
This way?
I'm back a little bit.
Yep. That's
Yeah,
back.
there we go.
Forward is back and back is forward. But you can see the temperature on here does go to 160. Your convection oven will probably go to 160. This Nesco only goes to 155.
Okay.
Used to be 155 was a good temperature. We wanted to be between 160 and 170. Anything hotter there, you're going to cook things. So if you did vegetables at 155 or 160, you're going to cook the outside of it. The inside's not really going to dry. And so then it'll probably spoil. So we can give you that information as time goes on. But yeah.
Nice. So typically with dehydrators, it's just meat and produce, vegetables and fruit.
Well,
Is that pretty much
fruit,
it?
fruit, vegetables, you can do the leathers. And
Okay.
basically that's a blended fruit.
Okay.
Sometimes you add applesauce or something to hold it together.
Okay.
I've done watermelon.
Oh, wow.
My husband likes dehydrated watermelon. I don't like dehydrated watermelon. There's a difference in flavor. It's very, very concentrated.
Okay.
Okay. And so if somebody has like sugar issues or
Yeah.
glucose problems, they have to watch how much they eat because that sugar is so concentrated. But you got a whiff of that onion. It is super concentrated.
Yeah.
So be careful when you add it. You're going to get extra flavor.
Yeah,
with
I
that.
could smell when the powder was coming out. I could
That's
smell
right,
it.
right. Yeah, I didn't open the garlic onion.
Oh my goodness.
Let me tell you, if you're going to do garlic and onions at home, you might want to do it out in the garage or find another place because your house is going to have that odor for a while. I did it in a commercial kitchen because I
Okay.
didn't want that in my house.
I gotcha. So
Yeah.
great. So that's what we needed to know about dehydration, right?
Yeah, if there's any questions, let us know.
Thank you, LuAnn. Appreciate that. I think they're going to now talk to you guys about water bath canning. So there's actually two different methods of canning. We've got water bath methods, and we also have pressure method. Depending on the type of food that you have, it will determine what type of method it is that you need to be using. And so we'll talk about that as we kind of go through. But when it comes to canning, this is the part where you really have to pay very close attention. When it comes to freezing, you can kind of mix and match your fruits and vegetables together, or your different vegetables together, especially with like soups and stews and those kinds of things. You can kind of get experimental with it. With drying, you can do the same thing. When it comes to canning, unfortunately, you cannot. Your acidity levels need to be tested in order to know exactly what type of method it is that you're going to be using in order to make sure that botulism does not occur. Clostridium botulinum is a spore that is on many of our fresh fruits and vegetables. It's something that's actually a little bit more common than we actually think about or hear. But what happens is when it gets in an anaerobic state or inside of a jar where there's no oxygen, then that particular spore can mutate and turn into botulism. Now, will it mutate? We don't know. You never really know. It has to have a kind of a perfect condition for that to happen. But when it does happen, it's colorless, it's odorless, and it's tasteless. And therefore, it can be extremely dangerous. Usually what happens, it will immediately affect your respiratory system first, then your digestive system, your nerves, and kind of go from there. Unfortunately, people do, in fact, die from this. It is a deadly situation. So we want to make sure that we are very, good in practicing all the best methods when practicing food preservation. So I'll let LuAnn talk about the best way to do water bath canning, and then it'll come back to me and we'll talk about the pressure canning. So, LuAnn?
All right, awesome. So this is really what I was used to as far as canning is concerned. And I think Melanie mentioned it in class last week. I'm thankful to still be alive when I learned the different techniques that you should do and you shouldn't do. So this is water bath canning, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Right. So a couple things that you need to understand about water bath canning is that it's still important, but the main thing is the acid levels. And if you are not sure about the acid level, it's better to pressure can. So here, yes, we have zucchini, but it's pickled, okay? Tomato juice, it can be an issue because some tomatoes aren't as acidic as we think they are. If you follow USDA guidelines, though, you will see that we add acid to that. Now, in these particular tomatoes, we get phone calls all the time about this, where the liquid is floated to the top and you're not really sure if it's safe still. That's real common with tomatoes. And those tomatoes are a little bit on the dark side because I was trying to cook that down, make them a little bit thicker, more like a sauce.
Okay.
I was starting to get dark and I said, okay, enough's enough. And I canned it. So, but that's what happened there. And it's still okay. And when just like anything else, you shake it up and it's going to be good.
Okay. So do you need a specific machine or pot's okay to use?
Sure. Now, see, you can see this pot, I believe, and this is your traditional pot that comes with a wire. Let me tell you, if you're going out shopping for one, you want one that's stainless steel. They still will rust a little bit, but boy, the old ones, they rusted a lot. People, you could put a little bit of vinegar in there to try to help keep things clean. But at the same time, the main thing is keeping that dry. I've got a big pot that I can in, but it doesn't have a liner in the bottom. So I went online and I got, it's a cake cooler rack, or you could stack cakes with it. Came in 3 different sizes, and you can see then that it just fits right down in the bottom. Right.
Oh, perfect.
So the main thing is that we have 2 inches of boiling water over the top. And Bill, I think you have a 10-second video on showing that rolling boil over the top of the jars. And then here, this pot, inexpensive box store, and it has a liner, it can go in there. They don't have to be completely separated from each other. They need a little bit of space. Obviously, when they start rattling around in there, you can't help that because the water's boiling hard, but you don't want to put them in so that the jars touch.
Okay.
Yeah. But so anything, as long as you can get 1 to 2 inches of boiling water over the top and a cover for it, that pot is going to work for you, which means these can be done on the glass top stoves where some of our pressure canners, it's an issue. It's an issue.
And I know you have vegetables, the tomatoes and the zucchini here, but one time I know you made some jam.
Yeah, there's a little bitty jar.
That's right.
Yeah, I gave those gifts one time, and that's just orange jelly. And you can do those small jars. That is about the half of the size of a typical jelly jar. And so when you look at those jars and it gives you the directions and the times, and it doesn't give you for that size of a jar, you use the same temperature for the regular jelly jar.
Okay, and I know you used pectin before when we made them. So what is the major role in the
Right.
jam or the jelly? So typically, how is that used and why is it so important?
Okay, well, pectin is used, and I'm not sure if we have a video for that or not. Do we? That's added in the right combination, it's going to turn it into jelly. Too much pectin, you might have rubber jelly.
Oh, wow.
But that could also be from overcooking.
Mm.
So follow the directions on the pectin, and most of our USDA recipes coincide with them very well. But what happens is that it's those three things coming together in the right combination. So people want to leave out some sugar. You saw a lot of sugar in that picture.
I did.
And people don't want to do that. There is low sugar pectin. Follow their directions. You're going to read those and say, that's not low sugar.
Wow.
Because it's still
A lot.
It's still
Okay.
a lot of sugar. But if you just want to can fruit and do something like chia seeds or something afterwards, you can do that.
Okay.
But you don't do it before you can it.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. And also with the pickling here, you said these are pickled zucchini.
That's zucchini pickles.
Okay.
Yes.
So what are some foods that they typically pickle, and is there something you have to do to that process? So pectin is for the jam and jelly. What should you do when you're pickling?
You need to make sure you have 5% strength of vinegar.
Okay.
And it'll say it right on the front. Except if people want to play around with balsamic vinegars and everything like that and give it flavor, it's not going to do the job for you because it's not 5%
Okay.
acidic. And I have canned green beans, carrots. You think of all your relishes.
Mhm.
Think of, I'm going to say it wrong, piccalilli.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All of these combinations, cauliflower, because you're adding the acid,
Mhm.
But I did have a gentleman in a class say, everything's sour.
Oh.
Well, yeah, when you add that vinegar, it's going to
It'll
make
do
it sour. A lot of them also do have a lot of sugar added to them to counteract that strength of the vinegar. But there's tons of USDA recipes out there, and they make a nice supplement, something to add, put on sandwiches, and it's pretty much everything.
Gotcha. And it's good that you mentioned in some of the recipes that you still have to add sugar sometimes because you do get that strong flavor. You really don't even think about adding, the sugar unless you're going to do pickling on your own. So that was a good tip. Learned that myself.
Good.
Right. Anything else that we need to know that you can think of?
How about out there? Do we have any questions? Okay, back to you, Melanie. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. A lot of great information there. As she was talking about the different types of pectin, I just happen to have a couple of them here. So I was going to show you, this is just your standard, this is Sure Gel. It's just a standard pectin. She talked about the no sugar added. They also have one that's in a pink package that will actually say, I don't know if you can see it right across the top, it actually says no sugar needed recipes. There are recipes in here. They're all safe to use. We do recommend this particular brand. When it comes to extension, you'll often hear us say we don't recommend certain things. When it comes to canning, we do. There's an exception to the rule. So there are certain brands that we know that we can trust. With this, there are some recipes in here that also use Splenda to make a jam or a jelly. So if you're looking for something like that, make sure you're looking for the pink package for there. You also have liquid pectin. Certo is one of the more popular brands of liquid pectin, and it will make your jelly a little bit more loose. It won't have much of a firming mechanism to it, but it is a good one. So now we're going to talk about a little bit about the pressure canning method. So as LuAnn had talked about with boiling water bath, you don't have to have a specific type of pot. You can have a boiling water bath, but one that's obviously large enough that you can put your jars in. When it comes to pressure canning, that's totally different. we absolutely have to have a pressure canner, not a pressure cooker. Many of them that are on the market now are cooker canner combos. Those are fine as long as you're following the instructions of that particular piece of equipment that specifically states that it is a pressure canner as well. So making sure that you're using that aspect of it. When it comes to canners, there's two different types. You want to pop that picture back up there, Bill, if you don't mind. There's two different types of canners. We actually have a dial gauge and a pressure gauge. So your dial gauge is that one that's in the blue on the picture there. You can see that it actually has a dial on it to where you can see the actual numbers. The other one is a weighted gauge, and each of those weights that are kind of on the top are a different amount. You have a 5 pound, 10 pound, or 15 pound pressure. So depending on the type of gauge that you have, and really it is personal preference as to which one you want. A lot of people will come to us and say, oh, I like the dial gauge because I can see it. It's more visual, especially new people who are new to canning. The issue with dial gauges is sometimes they do become uncalibrated and they need to be reset. In order to do that, you have to send it back to the manufacturer, unfortunately. So you're putting it in the mail, shipping it off somewhere, they're recalibrating it and then shipping it back to you. And I always get a little hesitant about that, to be honest. The weights, they're always going to be what they say on there. 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, unless you pick that weight up and have a Mack truck run over it and chip a side of it for whatever reason, it's always going to be the same weight. So there's a little bit of the old school in me kind of likes those weighted gauges. It's just a matter of hearing. So, all right, you can take that picture down. All right. So what we're going to talk about is the types of food that you use for pressure. These are going to be the ones that are considered low acid foods. So those are your meats, your soups, your stews, seafoods, and really any vegetable that you're not pickling. So we are not adding acid to anything. These are strictly just your vegetables, with the exception of tomatoes. She had spoken about tomatoes earlier. I actually have some tomatoes here that I actually did. I'll put that in there. I did these a while back. Any kind of tomato that you do, whether you do it in a boiling water bath canner or in a pressure canner, you must add acid. You could either add vinegar, lemon juice, or citric acid. And there's specifically an amount per quart or pint or whatever it is that you're doing. And they'll specifically tell you in the recipe. The other thing to make sure that you're doing with this is, of course, using the right type of canner. With the pressure canner, we have a dial gauge pressure canner here. This dial gauge, you can kind of see the actual numbers on it. Take that off. Inside this particular canner, you will see that rack is in there. The other trick is if you don't have a rack, or what sometimes will happen is you may buy one of these at like a flea market, or you've got grandma's old canner and the rack has disappeared. You certainly can buy the Cape cooling rack like LuAnn had done. But what I've done in the past is I have a whole lot of these jars. We've got a whole bunch of rings. I just put the rings, line them up in the bottom, and then you put your cans right on top of the jars right on top. What you're basically doing with that is you're making sure that your glass is not sitting directly on the heat source, so that you're not cracking the glass as things start to heat up. So that's an idea. The other thing is the difference between pressure canning and water bath canning. We talked about how your water has to be 1 inch to 2 inches above your jars. With pressure canning, it actually, you only put 1 to 2 inches of water in the jar completely. You need a lot of air space inside here in order to build up the actual pressure. So making sure that you've got some airspace in there, 1 to 2 inches of water. When you put the jars in, you fill up your jars with your product and you put them in. Let's say we had a whole bunch. We've done a whole bunch of green beans. In our last batch, we only had maybe 2 or 3 jars. Well, if you put 2 or 3 jars in here and you clamp the lid down and you start to pressurize it, these are going to fall all over the place. They may fall and bust. So what we like to tell people to do is go ahead and fill the rest of the jar up with empty jars. Don't have to put a lid on it. Just put an empty jar inside there, and that way it's combining up some of that room so that it doesn't wiggle around. So you've got all your jars in there. You want to make sure that you put your lid on. These lids will actually tighten down. If we get it to actually go. And they're hard to get on and off sometimes on purpose. So we'll clamp that down. At this particular point, as you can see with this canner, we already have it on the stove. You want to make sure that you're actually loading your canner while it's on the stove. That way it's heavy. These are heavy duty. When you get all the jars of food and all that in there, they're heavy to pick up and move around. So load them on the stove. Once you get everything clamped down, then turn your heat source on. You'll want to turn it on to about medium high to high until you get up to pressure. And then you want to pay attention to whatever pressure it is that you're doing. If it gets too hot, it will start to increase pressure. If it gets too low, you need to increase your heat. So you have to play around with your heat in order to keep things pressurized. What will happen a lot of times is if your heat is not hot enough and you start to fluctuate with your heat, you have to start your time all over again. So if this goes up to 10 pounds of pressure, and then all of a sudden it drops down to 8, you need to turn your heat source back up to 10 pounds and start your time all over again. So your recipe will tell you if you need to, let's say with, green beans, it'll say pressurize it at 10 pounds of pressure for 20 minutes. Don't quote me on that. But those are just an example. If it says 20 minutes, and all of a sudden it dropped down to 8 pounds of pressure and you've already got 10 minutes in, you need to start that time over again. That constant 20 pounds of pressure or 10 pounds of pressure for 20 minutes is the key to pressure canning and making sure that those botulism spores are gone. And that way they're killed. There's no issue with anything happening later on. So once you get all that done and the time is up, everything's come to pressure, you turn your heat source off. These canners, especially the newer ones these days, actually have a locking mechanism on them. So as they heat up, they'll lock down automatically. They will not unlock until it gets down to a certain temperature. So once it unlocks, then it's safe for you to be able to open. The key to opening them is making sure that when you open it, you unlock it and you open it away from you. One of the most common injuries, I guess you could say, with pressure canning, a lot of people are concerned with, oh, the lid's going to blow off. You have all these explosions. They hear all of the horror stories. The safety mechanisms of these days is really, you have to really not be paying attention and really messing up in order for something like that to happen. It's very, very uncommon. What is common is people get excited. They open it up like this, look inside of it, and remember that you've got about 240 degrees of pressure inside here that is coming up straight into your face. So we've seen some singed eyebrows and all of those kinds of things. So making sure that we keep that going. The other thing with these is, I'm going to flip this around. Thank you, Bill. Flip it around. A lot of times, if you're not getting up to pressure when you turn it on, sometimes what will happen is there's a rubber ring that's in the lid. This rubber ring sometimes will start to get dry rotted, or maybe it's not being cleaned properly. And if this rubber ring is compromised in any way, when you go to seal it, it will not get an airtight seal. And if that airtight seal doesn't happen, you're never going to get up to pressure. So I recommend that every time you do a canning session, you take that rubber ring out, you wash it with soap and water, dry it, and then put it back in, making sure that you clean that and keeping it in good order. Now, if for some reason it does get old, they do start to dry rot after a while. What you can do is pick up a new one. A lot of times your hardware stores will have these particular rubber rings, If for some reason they don't, you can always contact the manufacturer, and usually they will be able to get you a new one that you can purchase, and they'll ship to you, depending on the brand that you have. When it comes to pressure canning, I will say that this is one of the things where it's not always the most cost effective. If you've got all of that bounty from your harvest, certainly it's the way to go. If you're having to purchase all of your fruits and vegetables, your product, then all of your jars, then your canner, it may not be the most cost effective to do canning. However, when it comes to health reasons, this is where I kind of get my bucks on, and that is, you know exactly what it is that you're putting into your jars. There's no preservatives in here. When it comes to shelf life or how long they last, it's only for 1 year. So we have a 1 year shelf life. When it comes to any kind of water bath canning, pressure canning, any kind of home food preservation is 1 year. After that, it doesn't mean that's going to go bad. It just means that things will start to kind of break down and they're not going to be the best quality. So keeping in mind that 12-month period, you do not need to use salt when it comes to any kind of canning. So salt is strictly an additive for flavor. It's not for the actual preserving. A lot of people think that, because we used to salt dry a lot of our meats, or they would preserve it for a long period of time, that's what it's used for. It's not in canning. It's strictly just for all of your flavorings and all. So we've got some kind of products here that are really interesting, that are kind of help you out as far as tools go when it comes to canning. This particular product here, this is Ball. I hope you can see that very good, but it's an actual kit, utensil kit, that comes in. This is your funnel. So best thing in the world when it comes to canning is using a funnel. It makes things so much easier, so much cleaner. Here's your jar. Funnels sit right inside. They're made to fit your regular mouth jars. So cleaning it up, you want to, when you're putting your product inside of your jar, you want to make sure that you're keeping the lid or the ring around it as clean as possible. Any kind of product that gets on here needs to be cleaned off. And then once it goes into the canner, that lid can then seal on top of it. The other thing is our lids themselves, our lids and rings, which are these. You can buy these separately. A lot of when you're buying jars these days, they'll usually come in an entire case with the lids and rings already on them, but the jars are reusable. So these are all tempered glass. Once you get these jars, you can use them multiple times. You just want to make sure that you're checking them for any kind of cracks, any kind of scoring. What happens is if there's a weak spot within the glass, when it goes under pressure, it could potentially break, certainly, and shatter. I've done this many times. I used to work in a canning center, and we did high volumes of cans. And one of the most heartbreaking things is to open up a canner and see glass just floating around in a product. And you have to throw everything out because it's just unsalvageable. So making sure that you're putting in all that work, you're making sure that you're using proper jars. Making sure that you are using proper jars, Ball, Mason, Kerr. There's a couple off brands that are out there that we don't necessarily recommend. I'm not saying that they're bad, but we've just not done testing on them. So making sure that you're getting proper jars. A lot of people will ask me, well, what about reusing a jelly jar or reusing maybe an old mayonnaise jar? We do not recommend doing that. Many of those jars are one-use only jars. They're not tempered glass. And so we do not recommend using old jars, making sure that you're using true canning jars for any type of canning. Now the lids and the rings are multi-use. As long as, after a while, they may start to pit or rust. Keep in mind that the rings come nowhere near the food, so it's not vital. But of course, if they start to get that way, you certainly dispose of them and get new ones. The lids are one-time, single-use only. So you do have to buy new lids. With these lids, these are the two-piece lids and rings. These are what is recommended by USDA. These are the only ones that are recommended by USDA. There are many different types of lids and rings out there. There's many other ones that are one piece that we do not recommend. So with these, this is made by Ball. So with this particular lid, you'll see kind of a darker around the circle edge. That darker piece kind of has it, you can't feel it now because of it, it's not wet, but once it starts to get heated up and get moist, it will start to get sticky. It kind of has almost a glue-like substance. And what happens is it will stick to the jar, and then as the pressure comes through, it will seal down. So if you can hear that, it's a little bubble at the top. That means that it's not sealed. Once everything goes through the canner and it's sealed, you won't be able to hear any kind of noise. It's concave down. So that's your testing point, so to speak, for your jars to make sure that they are in fact sealed. The other thing with that is if for some reason you take your stuff out of the product out of the jar, or out of the canner, and you're done with your time, you want to leave them on the countertop, cool, dry, leave them alone for 24 hours. What happens, especially when it comes to boiling water bath canning, they will seal sometimes after they get out of the jar or out of the canner. So you've got them out on the countertop, they're sitting there, and then all of a sudden you'll hear this little ping, 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 an hour or so later, it's those jars sealing. And what happens is as they're starting to cool down is when the jars will actually finally get that vacuum seal going on. So you leave them alone for 24 hours. After the 24 hours, you want to walk over to them and kind of push down on that lid and see if they're sealed. If you hear that, that means it's not sealed. What you can do, you have a couple different options. You can either immediately put that jar of product in your refrigerator, use it within the next couple of days, whatever it is, or you can reprocess it. What you need to do when you reprocess is take the lid and ring off, making sure that you clean the top real well, get a new lid, place it on, and then you can go back and either reprocess it in your pressure canner or your boiling water bath. Now, I will warn you that if you do that, keep in mind that you're boiling the product, you're putting something under pressure. Let's just say green beans, for instance, we're putting under pressure. You're cooking it. It's got to get to 240 degrees because 240 degrees is that optimal temperature that botulism spores are killed at. That's why we're putting them under pressure. So if you're cooking it at 240 degrees for a certain amount of time and then you reprocess it, that means you're cooking it a second time. You may not, your green beans might be a little bit more on the mushy side or softer than you particularly like. So reprocessing may not be an option for you. If you don't mind, because you're going to be sticking them in a casserole or a soup or stew or something, reprocess it is perfectly fine. Any other things as far as gadgets go for all of these, you want to simmer these in the very beginning, just in a small amount of water. In order to activate that stickiness that's on the top before you put it on the jars. This little gadget, I call this my lid getter outer. I'm real technical. What it actually does is it has a magnet on the end of it. And so if you're in the jar of obviously hot water, it will release. And then you can just put it right onto the jar and you don't have to burn your fingertips. You do this enough times, you have no fingertips left, I think, after a while of burning them. I'm sure many of you novice canners out there can feel my pain there. So there's that. And then this, we talked about headspace earlier. This gadget is a headspace. I call this also my bubble getter outer. But on the end of it, on the end of here, there's different measurements. And so you can see that this is 1/4 of an inch, that's a 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch, and 1 inch headspace. So you can see where you're trying to measure. If you've done it enough times, you can kind of look at the rings of the jar and know your different headspace. But this little tool will show you exactly where that is, and that's great. once you get the product in the jar and you've already filled it all up, a lot of times there's a lot of, bubbles will get inside here, especially if it's like, a product that's more thicker pieces, carrots, green beans, corn, something along those lines. You want to make sure you can get all the air bubbles out. So we'll use this to go around the jar, kind of squeeze everything in and making sure that all the bubbles come out. So the reason we want to get the bubbles out is because you're wanting to increase the pressure in here to that 240 as quickly as you can. And the more air bubbles that are in there, the more you'll end up losing headspace in the end, and that can compromise getting it up to temperature. So, and then this is our jar lifter. So obviously your jars are hot when they come out of there. When that lid unlocks, we talked about it getting up to 240. Oftentimes when it unlocks and you're opening it, when you open that lid, you can look down inside there. The product that's inside the jar is still boiling. So you know that it's at least 212 degrees still. So it's hot. You don't want to stick your hands in there to try to pull them out. But we do have these little gadgets here. Jar lifter. It clamps down onto the side of it, and then you can pick it up and put it down without touching it with your hands. So these are really convenient and easy. I think I picked that up for like less than $10 for the entire kit. So it's relatively, fairly inexpensive. Canners these days, you can pick them up at garage sales, those kinds of places, flea markets. A lot of times people will sell them. If you're looking at going to a store to buy one, they're ranging. You used to be able to pick them up for about $65, $75. I've priced them lately. You're looking at $90, $95 to about $125, $130 for a 16-quart canner. Now I say 16 quart because that's the size that USDA recommends, because when they do any of their testing for all of their recipes, all of the testing is done on 16 quart canners. So that's what we recommend. There are some that are higher or larger than that. You can go up to 24 quarts. They're perfectly safe to use, just making sure that you're following the instructions for that particular user's manual of that item. The one I have here that I've been showing is a 16 quart. This is a Presto 16 quart canner that I purchased several years ago. I've used this in canning classes many times. Works great. I think I picked it up for like $75 at a big box store locally. They're usually pretty common to get. I will say that trying to buy pectin is getting a little bit difficult. There for a while when it came to the pandemic and a lot of the shortages on things, canning jars were actually very difficult to find. So a lot of people were stocking up on those, and we were having a really hard time teaching classes because we couldn't get canning jars either. So that's something that you want to kind of watch out for. Your larger stores will typically have them. You can order them online as well through Ball or through a company called Jarden who actually sells them direct. So those are definitely ways that you can get them as well. Any other questions when it comes to pressure canning or making sure that we understand the difference between water bath and pressure and what products need to be warrant which use, which method?
Yes, we have a couple of questions on here. Most of them are coming from PJ, who's one of our regular followers.
Great.
And she asked, for example, with pickled beets, do they require some kind of different treatment? And do you cook things before canning or jarring, or does the canning process cook the food?
I'm going to lean
So
over. Okay, I'm going to lean over to LuAnn on the pickled beets question.
Okay, yeah, most of the recipes, am I on?
You are?
Yes, you're on.
Okay. Most of the recipes have you cook them, are USDA recipes, and they go into the water in the canner should be about the same temperature as the product going into the jar, so you don't shock the jar when you go in. But yes, you'll cook them. If you follow the USDA recipe, there's the vinegars in there, nothing specific. Some people like to thicken that. Do not thicken it. If you find a recipe somewhere that adds cornstarch or something, you can add that before you serve it, but please don't do it. And none of our recipes have that in it. So it's going to be just like pickling the cucumbers or something. You're going to cook the brine. In this case, the zucchini slices went into the brine. Sometimes you pour the brine over the vegetables. Just follow our directions and we can get those directions to you.
Great. Thank you, LuAnn.
Okay.
The other thing that I will add to that is when it comes to cooking, especially with pressure canning, there's two different types of packs that I didn't talk about. We have a raw pack or cold pack, and then we also have a hot pack. And basically what that is, let's say with green beans, and I'm using that as an example because that's the most common question that we usually get is green bean questions when it comes to pressure canning, is you can hot pack, which is basically you're bringing them up to a boil and getting them hot before you putting them into a hot jar, or you put the green beans into the jar cold. So they've not been heated. The jars are still warm because you want to make sure that you're putting something in a warm jar before you stick it into the canner. However, obviously pressure canning is cooking the product. That does not mean that we recommend it doesn't need to be cooked after it's been taken out. So once you take your jars have been sitting on your shelf for a while, you want to enjoy those green beans later on. We recommend that you do put them on the stove and have them bring them up to a boil for at least 2 to 3 minutes, if not longer. So we do recommend that you cook them after you take them out of the canner.
Okay, and we have a question about a little bit of a tongue twister there, but can you can soups and sauce and with meat in the sauce? So I guess like spaghetti sauce with meat in it.
The answer to that is yes, as long as you have a USDA approved recipe. This is not one where you make up your own spaghetti sauce recipe, add meat to it, and then stick it in a jar and can it or pressure can it. You don't know the acidity level of your particular sauce or spaghetti sauce. So they do have, USDA does have some great recipes for meat sauce and meatless sauce. The So Easy to Preserve book, I think if Bill, there's a link somewhere in there, So Easy to Preserve, where our National Home Food Preservation website is a great source to go to. They have a lot of recipes on there. The book itself has a lot of recipes inside that book. Everything there is USDA approved, so we can make sure that we get the proper recipe.
I would like to add a comment. The first time I did vegetable soup, I followed the USDA recipe. I thought, perfectly. It was just that when I filled the jars, note when it says to fill it half full of product and then cover with broth, I filled it too full with the product and we couldn't use that because yes, follow those. They made it so that it's going to be safe, and be careful. If you don't follow it, please don't eat it.
Okay, and PJ really enjoyed seeing the different, the funnel and the different tools that you can use with canning. Some of them I was familiar with. Not all of them, though. I've never seen the little headspace measurer, I guess. That's pretty cool.
Yes, this here.
And very handy. And she's glad that she's seeing all this. And probably just one more little quick question. If you guys can give just a little bit more of an overview about which examples of which different items that you may be able to grow in your garden that you're going to use with each process. So maybe some quick ideas of which things are going to freeze best, which things that you have to pressure can, which ones you just have to hot water bath can.
I'm going to throw that to LuAnn.
Okay. Well, the thing is, you can, like the green beans, pickled green beans are great, but do you want all of your green beans pickled? You might want some of them dried because the kids don't always like your cooked green beans. Some people prefer them frozen. Some people prefer a vegetable can. It's your preference. It's just that we want to follow it safely. And if you want to turn it into a powder and sneak it into that casserole, obviously dehydrating is the answer there. We have safe methods for almost every item of produce that you might grow. I'm not thinking of anything off the top of my head Radishes or something, maybe not too many preservative methods for those, but for most of it, we have a way to do it.
Perfect. Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everybody. It looks like it's just about that time. So if anybody has any further questions, please feel free to contact your local county extension office. And Wendy, I was going to ask if you were hiding kind of in the corner there or not.
I was letting Melanie up here. She was running the show. So I was just in the background chatting
She
with
was. You guys are naturals at this.
Oh, doing great. Thank you guys again for all being here with us for another series. And we look forward to hopefully having you guys back next week for our expert panel. Next Friday, same time, same station.
Yes, next Friday. What are we doing next Friday?
That's our expert panel next week.
So we're going to have everybody back to
You got it.
answer any questions. So if you have any questions or anything that you want to ask us about, just write it down, take notes, save it up, and tune in next week, and we'll have everybody here to be able to answer for you live.
And as always, thank you guys for completing the surveys. I do see those results, and we really appreciate the feedback. Thank you guys, and we hope you have an awesome weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, thanks so much, everybody. See you next week.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Bye.